Okay, we want to be talking today about no-dig gardening, but there's mainly because there's one thing that a lot of the experts don't talk to us about or tell us about that is really important. Now, the whole principle of no-dig is that we want to be feeding and looking after the life in the soil, because it's that life that feeds our plants by trading the nutrients, and without it we haven't got anything. Now, these beds here are dead easy to make, and you might recall recently I put these fruit canes in here. Just a pallet collar laid on top of some cardboard, filled with compost, and away you go. But obviously it's not perfect because you get weed growth. Now, a lot of people think that no-dig gardening means no weeds. It's just not true. You do get them. There's nothing you can do about it because the wind will bring in the seeds, and in the case of this bindweed, I've got it growing between these two spaces, and that will get everywhere. So because it's a no-dig bed, it's very easy to pull them up. Now, other weeds you can make use of. The great thing about these beds is that they look quite dry on the surface, but underneath it holds its moisture. But the top surface looks dry. Now, I'm going to show you another bed that isn't quite like this. It's 3 years old, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to maintain. So this bed is 3 years old, and it started off like this. 2 hours later, I've got this. Now, here I've got 2 holes, and I'm not quite sure what animal has got in there, but it has. So I'm just going to fill it in. It's gone down a fair old way. But if you look at this soil, it's bone dry, and it's started to oxidize because it's been baked by the sun, and that is not a good thing, because if the soil gets too hot, all our microbes start going down. And if you think that your plants, most of them are fairly shallow rooted, those microbes aren't going to be there because of the heat, so they keep going down and down and down. You're not getting any food for your plants. Now, there's ways around that. Obviously, one thing you can do is apply additional feeds, and there's a video on the channel about how to make your own liquid feeds using weeds. I don't like to use the term weeds because a weed is a plant in the wrong place, and I can use them all the time, which I'm going to show you in a second. But one thing we need to do is, the main thing we need to do with no-dig is look after the life. That is the whole point of not digging the ground. But this wouldn't work. Now, if this was full of veg, I'd be in trouble. So I would need to be applying those compost teas or those weed teas to make sure my plants get the nutrients that it requires. So I've got to protect the life. So how can I do that? Well, let me show you. So we're looking at a bed here, and at the minute we've got onions either side of this row of carrots. You'll notice that the carrots didn't germinate very well. Further on down we've got another bed, and they're much better. But look to the sides of these beds, and in between them all we've got a lot of plant growth. So we've got some poppies in there, there's a little bit of rapeseed oil seeds, I'm guessing, I think that's what it is, or mustard, some grass and all sorts of bits and pieces that I want to cut this grass, these pathways, and then what I'm going to be doing is putting the cuttings from that onto these beds. We've got a rogue tomato there as usual. We've always got a volunteer tomato somewhere. And in actual fact, coming around the other side, I don't know how it's got there. We've even got a lettuce. But I want to be keeping this soil cool, because if it gets too hot, then those microbes and the soil life is just going to go further down into the ground, and I'm going to lose the benefits of them feeding my onions and my carrots. So by using the cuttings from the grass, I'm going to be able to mulch these areas, keeping the soil cooler and stopping those microbes going too far down. So that's one principle. But there's another way of doing it. So we've had the front field cut for bales, and then I've gone out and collected this stuff, this hay, straw, whatever you want to call it. Now the thing is that, like I say, most experts in no dig are not talking about the idea of mulching the beds or the importance of it. Other gardeners do, and it's great, but they're not giving you the full facts. So let me do that for you now. Now the idea of using a mulch is to, like I say, keep the soil temperatures down, to keep the microbe life up. Great. A lot of people think, oh, you're putting the straw down to keep the moisture in. Yes, up to a certain point. But there's two things you really do want to consider before you use the straw. Now the first one is, where did that straw come from? Because if it's come from a non-organic source, then the chances are that it's going to have a chemical residue on the straw. Just like when you think about using horse manure in your vegetable garden when you first start and you want to prep up your no-dig beds, you want to make sure that that horse has not been eating any hay that's been sprayed with a chemical like Grazon, for example. They contain a chemical compound called aminopyralids. Hard to say, but basically what it means is that it will stunt the growth of your crops if you want to plant into that manure. The same principle applies with straw. You're going to have a chemical residue on that straw that will leach into your ground unless you know that that straw is chemical free. That's the first thing. So let's assume that you have got a mulch that is chemical free, like this stuff. Okay, now great, you want to apply the mulch to the beds. So if you look across to this one here, that's exactly what I've been doing. Now there's a trick to this. Right, let's get a couple of handfuls of straw down here. It isn't just a question of throwing it on. There's method in the madness. A typical proper gardener. Get on your hands and knees. So what you're looking to do is to get it on there, and you're looking for around about 20 odd centimeters or so, good couple of inches, and just pop it on. Don't get too close to the roots of the plant. Give it a bit of breathing space. And if you'll also notice that I've got the drip irrigation here. So if the irrigation hose is underneath, that's not an issue, not a problem. So there you've got your layer. And a lot of people think, oh, that's great, no problem, I don't have to worry anymore, it's going to hold my moisture. But as well as knowing that it's not that it's chemical free, there's something else you need to think about. If this material gets wet, it's going to get matted, and if it gets matted, then the humidity underneath there is going to rise quite significantly, which is not what we want, because it will rot the plants. So we're not looking for that. So we want it to be nice and light, not too light that the wind blows it all away, but we need to keep it fluffy, because if we don't, humidity is going to build up underneath and it's going to get very wet down there. And what will happen is that your slugs and snails will find a lovely place to come and live and start munching your plants at night, but the humidity build up in there will rot your plants, and it'll be the wrong conditions for the soil life to thrive. So we want to keep it loose or fluffy. If you just throw it down and it becomes a mat, air can't get in, and the soil life needs the air, as to the plant roots, and you're going to get an awful lot of disease. But like I say, we need to be mulching these beds here, because if I get 38 degrees Celsius, I don't want my soil drying out like this and knocking back my plants. Yes, I want to keep the moisture in, but I also want to keep that soil life close to the surface, and using this little bit of humidity here is going to work. Now, a lot of people think too much humidity creates growing problems. Yeah, in a greenhouse, but not out here, because by keeping this soft and loose, you're going to be introducing air. So therefore that humidity level won't be too high, which is another reason why you don't want it to mat. So if I get a rain shower and then this dries out and it gets solid, I need to come along here with a little pitchfork maybe and just loosen it up. Just pick it up, drop it back down again, and it'll be okay. A bit like the compost heap, same principle that you're applying here. You do need air. So that's going to hold that moisture in this line here. Okay, I've got nothing growing in here, but it's going to still benefit these plants to the sides. And what I can do is apply some down to the sides of these guys. So I've got all bases covered. So that's the thing that, like I say, no dig experts don't talk about the reasons behind mulching, because I guess their conditions aren't like ours here, or maybe yours where you are. We do want to mulch, we do want to hold the moisture, but the important thing is that we want to protect the life, because it's the life in the soil that's feeding our plants. Now there's another way that we can mulch without using this, and I'll show you what that is now. Now last year I grew a huge amount of squashes here, and I didn't weed the beds that they were in, and my logic behind that was that I wanted those weeds to protect the plant from the sun. It worked out all right, and the video shows you just how many we got out of the ground. I can't remember the exact total, but it was a lot. Now I'm going to be adopting the same principle here, but I want these plants to get on a little bit more growth wise before I do it. But this is a great example. Now if you come around and look at this, we get a lot of this stuff growing here, and it's called lamb's quarter. Now take a look at that root. That's quite a long root in relation to the size of the plant. That is going down into the ground, and it's sucking up all the minerals and the nutrients to feed this guy. But if we pull these up, we can do a number of things with them. As in that bed I showed you at the beginning, I cleared that bed of this stuff and I put it on the compost. So as these guys rot down, they'll release their minerals back into the soil. But when I'm in a bed like this, I can just pick these up and drop them onto the bed that I want to protect. So this is a cheat's way of doing what's known as chop and drop. So where we were talking at the beginning about me cutting the grass along the paths and using that as a mulch, I can do exactly the same with this stuff here. I'm not looking for weeds that have got seed heads on them, obviously, but I can just keep doing this. So if I don't want to put them on the compost, look how easy it is to pull this out, and look at the length of that root. Slow them on there. They'll dry out in the sun. It's exactly the same as if you were hoeing, but with this you're actually pulling the roots out from the ground, because it's so easy to do with these no dig beds. This is another bed that's 3 years old. You can just literally pull them up and drop them down. So I'm getting a mulch, and also these nutrients will be released back into the ground to continue feeding the soil. So our main weeds here, I keep saying weeds and they're not. The main plants that are in the wrong place, Simon, is lamb's quarter, and I'm trying to find some. Whenever you want something, it's never there, and then when you don't want it, there's loads of it. And we get a lot of this stuff. Now that, as it looks, is called red root amaranth. And again, I mean, you could eat this. It won't do much favours, but it is edible. But again, just put them down. Now I've got some areas here that I'm just going to let it grow a lot taller than it already is. I'll show you that. So this is the lamb's quarter in this particular space here. It's had no water. You can see it's drying out quite a bit. If I watered this, I can get this to grow up to about a metre and a half. And this is before it goes to flower and then starts to set its seed. That's how it reproduces. But when you look at that just small amount of plant material I've just got there, It's quite a substantial bit of mulch that can potentially be used. So if you haven't got straw or hay, and you've got some of this stuff, throw that down instead. So this is another smaller squash bed. In here I've actually got butternuts. Now the idea is that these guys are going to stay in the ground after the kohlrabies down there have finished, and I should just train them to go down the line here. But in here we've got a lot of purslane, and that's this stuff here. Now this is edible, gives you quite a citrusy flavour to it. Let's get rid of this red root amaranth. You see how moist that soil is? Now a lot of people go, oh, you've got a weedy vegetable patch, have I? Well, here's the thing. Anything that's covering the ground, like this purslane, is a great example. We'll keep that moisture in the soil, which is what we want. It is much cooler under this plant than it is if it was just bare soil. That's an obvious statement. But again, it's keeping those microbes and the soil life near to the surface to feed these butternuts. This will spread like a mat, but its structure allows for air to get through, which it needs itself in order to keep growing. Now, so as well as being an edible, it's a great way of stopping other weeds from growing. So it's going to protect my plants and also help the soil life. So I'm using what I've already got as a way of protecting my soil. The principle of no dig is a great one, but remember, it's the principle, and all principles or theories can have some modifications. So what might be great for somebody in the southwest of England isn't perfect for me here. With weather like this soil is going to dry out. I need to be protecting the soil, and the only way to do that is applying a form of a mulch. So you're either, like I say, you're either looking at your grass cuttings from your pathways, as we mentioned earlier on. Straw is a great one, obviously non-organic, because you don't want to be bringing in those chemical residues, and leaving some of those plants in your vegetable patches that you might consider to be a weed, but in actual fact often turns out to be a huge benefit. So if you could look at the idea of that particular plant not being a weed, and you're harvesting it for your compost or using it to protect your soil and your plants, you've done away with weeding. You don't have to weed it. So when we look at all these beds, okay, they're 3 years old. So I started them all off with a wooden frame, filling them with compost and getting the plants in the ground. And like I say, last year 532 kilos, and I'm aiming to try and get somewhere near the same amount. Maybe if I grew one huge pumpkin, I might get to that 500 kilos. Can't live off pumpkins though, can you? Anyway, as we look at all these, it looks a mess. To most people, it looks a mess. I've got poppies here. Yeah, okay, well the bee's going to feed off those, and that's wonderful for our biodiversity. As you know, it's quite important to us. I'll cut these paths and I can use them as a mulch. If you look down this line here, I sowed these turnips 2 days ago and they've already germinated. That's so fast. So I'll let them grow, but fairly weed free. Then you come into this bed, it's got nothing in it at the minute apart from something growing. So we've got the obvious grass, we've got some purslane here. That is grass. If I pull it, look how easy it is to pull it out of a no-dig bed. Look how moist that soil is below. Sometimes your weeds do snap off, but that won't take very long to get ready to plant. And what's going in there are the beetroots. So we look at it all and we think, oh, it's a bit scruffy and a bit untidy. Yeah, okay, I need to cut the grass. But let me show you another thing that demonstrates by just how good it can be when we keep our soil covered. And as we do that, let me show you this. Now, I've not seen that growing here before. Look at that. What is this? If anybody knows what that is, let me know. I think that looks nice. but is it a weed? So we're now looking at the strawberry beds, as well as a very big green lizard running around through there. And it's very hard to weed a strawberry bed. So we just pick the strawberries. So far this year, we're coming to the end of this particular season, and we've had 32.1 kilos out of this bed. Pretty good going. And that gives you an idea of the size of the lamb's quarter, how big it can go. It can go taller than that, but I've got my eye on this. We'll have him. But again, the soil is quite covered, well covered. 32 kilos of strawberries out of here. It's not bad going, but do suffer with this crabgrass. So later in the year, we need to thin these strawberries out and plant them up. Got quite a few small ones here. But again, all this stuff growing in the same space helps one another. So this is a new bed for this year. So again, same principle. Get your frame, and in this case I'm using quite large logs, laid down a thick layer of cardboard, covered it with 1-year-old horse manure. I think it's 1-year-old. And then what I've done in here is I've planted squash plants. So there's all sorts. Courgettes are in here, and there's some butternuts. I think there's a couple of melons. To be honest with you, I can't remember what's in there. But if you look, you can see that there is some weed growth in here. Most of it is lamb's quarter again. Now, there's a bit of grass, and that's probably because the horse hasn't been able to digest the seed from the hay it's been eating. That's why you get the grass germinating. Now, this was full of lamb's quarter the other day, and I've cleared the lamb's quarter out of here to give the courgettes a chance to move on and start producing fruits. Now, that courgette looks pretty sorry for itself. Is that a courgette or is it a melon? I can't remember. Told you should label things, but this is going to get a drink in a minute using the sprinkler, and we'll soak this whole area. But then once these lamb's quarters start growing back again, these guys will have set fruit and won't require any more weeding. And I'll do what I did last year. Just let it go. The weight of the fruits will squash down and suppress quite a lot of the weeds around the plant. But in the main, I'll have a mixture of the two. And the great thing is I can harvest this lamb's quarter and again use it on a mulch somewhere else in the garden. Or if I don't need to do that, it goes on the compost. Either way, I'm not wasting the resource. So I need to plug this bad boy in, switch on the water, and give this lot a drink. So in Mother Nature, if you walk through the forest, the leaves drop to the ground, covers the soil, it gets recycled back into the ground by all the wildlife, feeds the things that are already there, the trees, the hedges, everything, the plants. And that's the full cycle. It's a similar setup in here. Well, look at that. This is a Mombrutia or Crocosmia, and it's coming into flower. Now, I planted this 3 years ago. Last year I had its first flower. This year, I get so excited when I see this. I've got two there, and I've got another one there. Look at that. And that is a very deep red that hits off against these lilies so well. All the way through here, okay, there's a bit of grass, but we don't dig any of this. We just leave it to do its own thing. The soil is covered and everything grows. So, you know, with this Crocosmia here, these huge lilies, and then in the back we've got all of those acrolegias. So I planted those acrolegias as plants 3 years back. I've been saving the seeds and just throw them everywhere. Or you just let them dry out, and the kids like nothing better than to bash them, and the seeds go over, just like poppies. They just spread themselves. They just colonise the place. And if you look down at the front bed here, we've got some purslane growing, and right by that yellow sign are some more acrolegia plants. But we don't dig. We hardly ever do any weeding, and we end up with displays like this. And it's the same with the lavender. And look at all the butterflies on there. So by keeping this whole space and its soil covered, we're getting all kinds of things. So look, I've got another mulberry tree growing here that's germinated from seed. Lots of aquilegias in there, big and small. These are the seeds to the aquilegia plants. If you listen, you might hear them rattling around, but you just literally just bash them. They just go everywhere. New plants for free. The soil life is working well and feeding all these plants. I mean, look at these buddleys now. It's going to be full of butterflies soon, hence its other name, the butterfly bush. Not quite there yet, but look at the blooms on that. So we're just going to end this video here by showing you the compost where you can make out in here. There's a lot of weeds in here, and what I also tend to do is I don't shake off too much of the soil from any roots I've got in plants, because it just goes back into the system, so I'm not wasting it. And like I say, this has come from that bed that I showed you at the beginning of the video where it took me a couple of hours to clear, so nothing goes to waste here, and it's going to be a great way of mulching again later on in the season. I hope you've got something out of that video, because it is really important, and a lot of people don't talk about it, that the relevance of having to use a mulch to not only keep the moisture in the ground, but also to keep the life closer to the surface to feed our plants. But take care, and I'll catch up with you very soon.